Welcome to DCS Global. Ukraine's UAV strike targeted a Russian missile facility in Volgograd, severely damaging its missile stockpile, including Iranian ballistic missiles and other critical weapons. This marks a major step in Ukraine's ongoing efforts to weaken Russia's military capabilities and shift the war's momentum. The Ukrainian army continues to move the war inside from Russian territory and leave Moscow helpless. The Russian ammunition and missile depot, located 600 kilometers from the Ukrainian borderline, became the target board of Ukrainian UAVs. The attack, which used more than 100 Kamikaze-type UAVs, dealt a critical blow to Russia's missile inventory. Russia has started to pay the price very heavily for the full-scale and unjustified invasion attempt it launched against the territory of Ukraine under the name of a special military operation. As a result of the instructions of Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, who was appointed Chief of the General Staff of Ukraine on the instructions of President Zelensky, the Ukrainian army, which adopted a completely offensive war strategy after 2 years, has signed moves that will completely change the balances in the war as of the second half of 2024. Along with the cross-border ground operation launched by Russia against the Kursk oblast on August 6th, airstrikes were another area where the Ukrainian army, which managed to catch Moscow at its most unprepared moment, was putting pressure on. Unlike Russia's indiscriminate airstrikes aimed at making people forget what happened in Kursk, the Ukrainian army has rewritten the fate of the war by targeting strategic military infrastructures inside Russia. In this process, the fact that some of the attacks carried out in accordance with Kiev's instructions targeted Russian air bases more than 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian borderline clearly showed the rapid development of Ukraine's war industry. The Ukrainian army, which added another one to these attacks at the end of September, mostly using FPV model Kamikaze drones and domestically produced UAVs, managed to both secure its own borders and deal a major blow to Russia's military inventory in just one move. Sunday, September 29th, in the morning hours of the operation, ignited fuse targeted a missile storage facility located near the village of Kotluban, located in Volgograd Oblast of Russia. The Ukrainian Military Intelligence Agency, HUR, the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, SSO, the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, SZRU, and the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, showed simultaneous and ingenious work in the airstrike on the facility, which is known to be located about 600 kilometers from the Ukrainian borderline. The attack, launched in a coordinated manner by Ukrainian forces, who are in constant contact with each other, began around 02:30 in the morning. According to the announced data, the attack, in which 120 Kamikaze model drones were used, led to very large explosion sounds being heard in the region. Eyewitnesses who reported the events via Russian social media stated that a very large fire occurred in the area immediately after the explosion sounds, and the flames took over the missile storage facility in question within a short time. After the attack on the complex, which was stated that, in addition to missiles, a large amount of ammunition and explosives were also deployed, NASA's fire monitoring systems stated that 3 fire points were seen around the arsenal in Kotluban. An official statement was not shared on the extent to which the ammunition contained in the facility, which allegedly belongs to the main missile artillery directorate GRU, affiliated to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, was affected by fires and explosions. Local authorities in the Volgograd region claim that explosive materials at the facility exploded after the destruction of the wreckage caused by fires and explosions. Hours later, data released by the Russian Defense Ministry showed that the size of the Ukrainian UAV attack was much larger than initially thought. In a statement, Defense Ministry officials said that Ukraine had carried out attacks on Russian territory with a total of 200 UAVs, and that 125 of these unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed during the night. The destruction of a total of 125 UAVs, 67 of which were in Volgograd, 18 in Rostov, and 34 in Belgorod and Voronezh regions, cannot be considered a success considering that the other 75 UAVs sent by Ukraine and hit the targeted military facilities of strategic importance. What happened at the ammunition depot located near the village of Kotluban in the Volgograd region, where the attacks were concentrated, could seriously disturb Russia's allies. It is claimed that ballistic missiles belonging to Iran and launch pads belonging to these missiles are also stored in the mentioned missile storage facility. Also in September, a Russian ammunition depot in Soldatsky in the Voronezh region was targeted during an attack by the Ukrainian army, destroying missiles that Russia had supplied from North Korea. Andriy Kovalenko, the head of the Ukrainian Anti-Disinformation Center, who shared the attack in details with the announcement via Telegram, stated that the North Korean missiles that Putin humiliated himself by asking Kim Jong-un during the attack were destroyed. The fact that Russian forces, who lost the missile support provided by North Korea before they even had the opportunity to use it, now lose the ballistic missile stockpile that Iran recently supplied within minutes, may lead to Russia becoming isolated in the Eastern Bloc as well as in the Western Bloc in the future. The arsenal in Kotluban, where the mentioned missiles are also believed to be stored, has been targeted by the Ukrainian army multiple times since 2023. The Telegram channel Astra, which is known to have connections with the Ukrainian security services and Kiev-affiliated sources, stated that a UAV attack was carried out on the Russian ammunition depot in Kotluban on November 16, 2023. On March 8, 2024, 2 UAVs hit the territory of the Russian ammunition depot, which Ukraine targeted again during mass attacks. The fact that Ukraine started to focus on airstrikes again happened as of September. As of September 18th, Ukrainian forces began to organize multiple operations against ammunition depots inside Russia, causing major destruction at an ammunition storage facility in the Tver region of Russia in the process. This move, described as the most damaging long-range attack by Kiev during the ongoing war process since February 24, 2022, is believed to be the airstrike that caused the most destruction in Russia since World War II. It was stated that this attack, which led to a small-scale earthquake in Tver, caused damage to Russia worth $39 million. The attack on the ammunition depot, located in the Toropets sector of the Tver region, located about 470 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, showed that the Russian capital, Moscow, is under a great threat, as well as dealing a major blow to Russia's inventory. The fact that the Ukrainian army can operate so comfortably at a point only 380 kilometers from the capital clearly shows how fast and effective the domestic war industry, in which Kiev is concentrating its work, is making progress. This could allow Ukraine to launch attacks on strategic points and military infrastructures deep inside Russia without needing the permission it has long requested from the West. As it is known, the countries of the Western Bloc led by the United States allow the use of long-range weapons supplied to Ukraine only within the territory of Ukraine. The reason for this restriction is the risk that if Western weapon systems are used in long-range attacks against Russia, Putin and his team could ignite the fuse of a global catastrophe such as a nuclear war. However, considering that Ukraine can launch attacks on the central points of Russia with its own manufactured weapons, it becomes even more obvious that Moscow cannot overcome the current crisis by making threats. U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller stated during a briefing on September 30th that Ukraine does not need the permission of the United States or any other Western country to hit targets inside Russia's borders with domestically produced weapons. Answering the question about why Washington did not approve Ukraine's request, Miller said, "When we approve any new weapon system or any new tactics, we look at how it will affect the entire battlefield and Ukraine's entire strategy, and we will continue to approach it that way. However, if you look at the weapons we have provided to Ukraine, we have made it quite clear that they can be used to retaliate against Russian targets that are carrying out attacks across the border. We are always investigating whether there are additional tools to provide to them." At this point, the Kiev government continues to state that the United States and other Western countries should not take Russia's threats into account, and that they need approval of their proposed request so that they can use Western weapon systems in large-scale airstrikes against Russia in order to force Putin to participate in reconciliation talks. The Ukrainian army has repulsed the attack organized by the occupation forces on the territory of Kharkiv. The Russian army, which has been trying to occupy the city of Kharkiv for months, this time launched an attack on the town of Tabaivka, which is under the control of the Ukrainian army. However, this attack organized by the Russian army ended in failure. The example of resistance shown by the Ukrainian defense forces against the occupying forces led to the withdrawal of Russian soldiers. Hundreds of Russian soldiers had to flee from the town of Tabaivka, which they had come to occupy. The violence of the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for 2.5 years, continues to increase every day. Russian President Vladimir Putin's insistence on Ukrainian territory has led to the prolongation of the war. The fact that the war is still going on has caused Vladimir Putin's statements, made in the first weeks of the war, to be remembered. Shortly after the Kremlin administration decided to invade the territory of Ukraine, anti-war and anti-Putin Russian citizens took to the streets to protest this war. Hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens took to the streets in many Russian cities, especially Moscow, organizing anti-Putin and anti-war demonstrations. At the same time, anti-war protests were organized in many countries of the world again, protesting against this invasion of Russia on the territory of Ukraine. But all these protests did not bring any results. Aware that Russian citizens will become more and more angry as time goes on, Putin made some statements in order to calm these citizens. In these statements, it was stated that this occupation on the territory of Ukraine will be completed within months and that no Russian soldiers will be harmed during the war. However, when we look at the latest state of the war has been going on for exactly 30 months, and the number of Russian soldiers who have lost their lives on the territory of Ukraine has exceeded hundreds of thousands. In the latest data announced by the Ukrainian government, we see that the number of Russian soldiers who lost their lives in Ukraine has exceeded 640,000. Russia, on the other hand, does not want to make any statements about the number of troops they have lost on Ukrainian territory. Vladimir Putin is hesitant to make statements about war losses, stating that all this data is a state secret. In the first 2 years of the war, the Russian army had not launched a major offensive through the territory of Volgograd. The Russian army had attempted to invade the territory of Kharkiv only once. After that, when the Ukrainian defense forces repulsed the Russian troops here, Russia did not attempt any attacks from here again. However, realizing that the duration of this war on Ukrainian territory is extending and that the duration of the war is beginning to lose strength, Putin launched a major attack on the borders of Kharkiv, this time through the territory of Belgorod and Luhansk. The Russian army is trying to completely occupy the territory of Kharkiv by creating a new front in Ukraine. However, since the Russian army could not do this only from the Belgorod front, it also sent Russian troops stationed within the borders of Luhansk to the Kharkiv border region. Russian troops stationed on the Luhansk front are also launching attacks inside the borders of Kharkiv, forcing the Ukrainian army to fight at 2 different points in Kharkiv. Thus, it was thought that the strength of the Ukrainian army would be reduced by half. Now the Russian army has moved from the town of Pishchany, occupied by Russian soldiers who have been mobilizing on the territory of Luhansk in recent weeks. The Russian forces, which moved through the town of Pishchany, this time targeted the town of Tabaivka. Recently, after the attack of the Russian army on the town of Tabaivka, part of the town was occupied by the Russian army. But the Russian army has hit hard rock this time. The Russian army, which organized a second attack, was defeated by the Ukrainian defense forces. As for the details of the operation, with the attack launched by the Russian army from the territory of Pishchany late at night, Russian soldiers entered the borders of Tabaivka. Russian soldiers met with the Russian contingent, which retains control of a part of the territory of Tabaivka. In this way, he thought that with a larger army, they could also occupy the rest of the town. The Russian contingent decamped within the borders of Tabaivka and launched an attack towards the center of the town, which is under the control of the Ukrainian army. However, the Ukrainian defense forces were already aware of such an attack much earlier. Russian soldiers were moving through the town in the dark of night and thought that the Ukrainian soldiers were not aware of them. However, the Ukrainian soldiers were aware that there was a movement in the area under the control of the enemy forces, as they were conducting reconnaissance flights with drones with night vision from 3 different points. When the Ukrainian drone pilots who were conducting reconnaissance flights realized that the enemy forces were preparing for an attack, they mentioned this situation to the Ukrainian troop commander. On top of this, the Ukrainian commander mobilized all his soldiers and created a large defense line in the region. The Russian army thought that there was a defensive line at only one point of the town. However, the Ukrainian commander, who learned that Russian troops were going to attack, increased the number of this defense line to 2. But the Russian army did not know this. Thus, a large part of the Ukrainian soldiers were sent to this defense line, which the Russian army did not know about. The Russian army launched an attack on the Ukrainian defense line to gain entry into the town's borders. The Ukrainian army began to respond to repel this attack of the occupation forces. At this time, Ukrainian soldiers stationed on the second line of defense came out of the forested areas and began to open fire on Russian soldiers. The Russian soldiers, who were attacked from a different point, were surprised by what they suffered when they saw the Ukrainian soldiers in front of them. The Russian soldiers, who changed their positions with a great panic, began to open fire, this time into the forest area. But the Ukrainian soldiers had camouflaged themselves so well that the Russian soldiers could only see the fire coming out of the barrel of the Ukrainian soldiers. The Russian army thought that they could ambush the Ukrainian soldiers by attacking in the dark of night. However, thanks to this strategic move of the Ukrainian army, the Russian soldiers themselves were ambushed. Just 20 minutes after the Ukrainian soldiers came out of the forest area and attacked, the Russian soldiers decided to withdraw. The Russian troop commander, who organized the attack, quickly canceled this attack by withdrawing all Russian troops from the region and decided to withdraw from the region. Hundreds of Russian soldiers left the territory of Tabaivka without even looking behind, while the Ukrainian army began chasing Russian soldiers. Thus, the Russian army was forced to retreat as far as the area of the town of Tabaivka, which was under its control. Thanks to this successful operation of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, this attack by the Russian army on the town of Tabaivka was successfully repulsed. Shortly after, the Ukrainian Defense Forces announced in a statement that the Russian army's attack on the town of Tabaivka had been repulsed. The Russian army is currently making a major effort to occupy the territory of Kharkiv. However, the Russian army, which has been trying to occupy the territory of Kharkiv for months, has been unable to occupy only some border towns. The fact that the Ukrainian army has been mobilized within the borders of Russia makes the Kremlin administration very nervous. For this reason, the Kremlin administration is trying to force the Ukrainian army to withdraw its troops from the territory of Kursk by increasing attacks in areas such as Kharkiv and Donetsk. However, the Ukrainian army continues its determination on the territory of Kursk. As it is known, there are currently not only Ukrainian soldiers within the borders of Kursk, there are also Chechen soldiers. And wasn't Chechnya on Russia's side? How are Chechen soldiers fighting in the Ukrainian ranks? The answer to this question is quite interesting, because there are Chechen soldiers currently fighting in the ranks of both Russia and Ukraine. So how does this happen? As it is known, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov in the first week of the war and signed an alliance. Together with this alliance, it was decided to send the Chechen army to the territory of Ukraine. Thus, tens of thousands of Chechen soldiers began to fight for Vladimir Putin on Ukrainian territory. However, when we look at the past history, decoupled between Chechnya and Russia, we see many wars and rebellions. So actually, Chechen citizens don't like Russia that much. Even some Chechen citizens hate Russia. Volunteer Chechen soldiers who hate Russia's pressure on Chechnya and think that Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov is one of Vladimir Putin's puppets, have gone to Ukrainian territory to fight in the Ukrainian ranks. Thousands of volunteer Chechen soldiers have been fighting against the Russian army on Ukrainian territory since the first months of the war. Now, there are reports that volunteer Chechen soldiers are again fighting for Ukraine on the territory of Russia's Kursk. Or rather, we can understand this from the video images published on social media platforms. The Ukrainian army is achieving its goals step by step. Ukraine's first goal on the way to absolute victory was to invade Russian territory with a cross-border operation. On the morning of August 6th, the button of the operation was pressed for this goal. The Ukrainian army, which entered the Kursk region very easily, occupied about 18,000 areas and 100 residential areas. The clearest indication that Putin is incapable of protecting his own borders is the fact that the Ukrainian army has moved the war to Russian territory. Putin's rhetoric since the beginning of the war is that taking Kiev means invading Ukraine. For this reason, the effort to occupy Kiev continues with all its remaining strength. From the point of view of Russia, it was expected that the territory of Ukraine would be fully occupied within 2 to 3 months. Only the strengthening of the Ukrainian army with NATO's support in the process has changed the direction of the war. An unexpected development for Putin is that he has upset all his plans and prolonged the war in such a way that the end is not certain. We have left 2.5 years of the war behind. Russia is about to sink due to material and moral losses in this process. The number of Russian soldiers who lost their lives in the war is estimated to be approaching 750,000. Putin is desperate enough to survive the military power shortage to hand over the borders to recruits. The Russian Navy is stationed in the Black Sea to strike the territory of Ukraine. During this period of the war, it is estimated that the Russian Navy lost 30%. It is used in many Soviet Union-era ships in the Russian Navy. In order to prevent the advance of the Russian army, the main goals of the Ukrainian army are to destroy Russian ammunition depots. Ukrainian army ground troops entered the Kursk region and blew up the warehouses of combat equipment and ammunition at the Russian headquarters. While Russia was experiencing a major economic crisis, the destruction of ammunition depots took a big blow to the Russian army. The target of the Ukrainian army this time is the ammunition depot in Mariupol. The Ukrainian army is conducting operations against the Russian army with much more solid strategies nowadays, when we have left 2.5 years of the war behind. As a power, the Ukrainian army has repeatedly proved its superiority over the Russian army. The Ukrainian army has managed to inflict millions of damage on Putin with its operations from the Black Sea to the air. Armored tanks belonging to the Russian army, unmanned aerial vehicles, millions worth of ammunition have been destroyed by the Ukrainian army. In addition, they managed to sink many Russian ships in the attacks against the Russian Navy organized by the Ukrainian naval forces in the Black Sea. Putin, who is at a dead end from all sides, is constantly failing, even though he has to deal with many problems at once. On top of the economic crisis in the country, it is still investing in munitions of war, but in all unsuccessful operations. These equipment are destroyed by the Ukrainian army. Putin's ambition for Kiev is to leave the headquarters and equipment warehouses unprotected in many important regions that Ukraine has seized. Due to the fact that there is too much shortage of military power, Putin has begun to ignore the regions he is responsible for. Ukrainian intelligence is quick to discover in which areas the Russian military is weak. With the information of the Ukrainian military units, it is organizing attacks on the weak points of the Russian army. One of them is the ammunition depot in the Mariupol region of Ukraine. The importance of the destruction of this warehouse is that it played a major role in repelling the Russian army by leaving it without equipment. The Ukrainian army pressed the button for an attack on this warehouse. Ukraine's own production unmanned combat aircraft were sent to the region, and Ukrainian Navy ships intervened in the region from the sea. The ammunition depot was deconstructed by the successive bombardments. The warehouse, which burned for a long time, was a great loss to the Russian army. The Ukrainian army has once again proved the superiority of equipment air systems. Putin has difficulty protecting his borders with diminishing opportunities at his disposal. Ukrainian drones and unmanned combat aircraft are frequently seen in Moscow and important regions. The Russian people are experiencing great fears in the face of this situation. They also organize propaganda that Putin is to blame for this situation. Putin is aware of all the failures that have happened. He is the most important factor in getting to this situation. Due to the fact that it has the sole decision-making authority, the generals and unit commanders are not given sufficient information and are not consulted. Internal army disorders are dragging the army to the bottom. Putin's acting in his own interest is also known as his biggest mistake. War commentators have various criticisms about Putin. In general, Russia is exhausted, and Putin is about how far he will continue to crawl. Having started the war with the confidence that it would last a short time and then unexpectedly prolonged it, Russia also experienced problems in domestic and foreign politics. The World Stock Exchange has now announced that trust in Russia has been reset. Important figures in domestic politics have started to stand up to Putin. The public has already been showing its reaction for a long time. His comments are frequently brought up in the world's media as signs that Putin's power is reaching the point of exhaustion. He has started to pay the price for the brutal sanctions that Putin has imposed on his people and army. Putin will be overthrown either by defeating the war or by a major coup that may take place inside the country. The rise of Ukraine continues. Naval ground and air units give strong signals that they can win the war with their superiority as combat equipment air systems. It is rapidly advancing to absolute victory by giving credit to the support packages it has received from the United States and Western countries. It is observed that Putin's power is noticeably weakening in the regions he has seized on the territory of Ukraine. The fact that the Ukrainian army records all its attacks and shares them on social media allows all Putin's lies to be revealed as well.